Welcome to Acadgild. Today we will discuss about Angular 2 routing and HTTP interview questions. So let's start. So how routing works in Angular 2? So routing is a mechanism which enables user to navigate between different views or components. In Angular 2, it simplifies the routing and provides flexibility to configure and define at module level. That's lazy loading. The Angular application has a single instance of the router service, and whenever URL changes, corresponding route is matched from the routing configuration array. So on successful match, it applies redirects and the router builds a tree of active routes objects and contains the current state of the router. Before redirection, the router will check whether new state is permitted by running guards. So you can use the guards like can activate or other guards. Route guards is simply an interface method that routes run to check the route authorization. After guard runs, it will resolve the route data and activate the router state by instantiations the required component into router outlet. So let's check the example. So I'm opening the Plunker site and then I'm using one of the example. So if you see here for routing, right? So we need to configure the routing part. So if you see in the app component.ts, we have route config. So route config is basically imported from the Angular route. Let me explain this. So if you see here, we have the router, route config, and router directives, which are in Angular 2 router library. So in router config, is basically the object with array. So where you need to specify different routes. For example, in this, we need to give the path of that object, which is actually the address of that component or the view. In the name, you can specify the name of that route and the component. So Angular 2 is also providing the components. So you can use that component here. And use as default is basically when you load the application, by default this first route will be activated by default. If you see the second one, we have the heroes here, name with the heroes and component, heroes list component. Third one is having some different like path. So here the path is a hero and we are providing the ID as well. So in the name, we have a hero detail and component has hero detail components. In the fourth one, we have a disaster and the name asteroid and which will redirect to crisis center, and we are just passing some values in the redirect to with ID 3. Okay, let's see the components. So you can create different type of the components. Let's say we have the crisis center here. In this component, we are showing some other routes as well. So inside this route as well, we have one main route, and inside other components, you can use the sub routes as well. So in crisis center also, we have route config and we are using crisis center, crisis detail, crisis list, 3 different things with the list and ID as well. So let's see how it will work. So when we load that, so if I click on the crisis center, it will give you the crisis center with the 4 element in here, right? So if we have the princess, hell captive, dragon, burning cities, and if I click on this, it will take me to the inside route, which is here. So when I click on this, it is showing me the ID and the name of that. So if you see here, crisis detail. So crisis detail component. So if I go to the crisis detail component, you will see here We are showing the ID, what ID we're getting from the function. When I click on particular element of that crisis center component, we are passing that ID and it automatically go to that particular right ID and it will show here. So in the heroes as well, when I click on the heroes, I'm going to this route and I'm showing this route on the page, and when I click on this, it will again similar kind of functionality is there. I'm showing the ID, which ID I am clicking here. So let's see here. So when we click on the add crisis here, we are having one function which will return you the crisis of particular element. So routing is basically used to navigate to different views. In earlier days, like we have a multi-page application, and right, so we have for example, we have a website and we have different kind of pages, right? Home page, about page, contact us page, right? So we need to load the page every time, right? So nowadays people are using single page applications. So but in single page application you can't provide the everything in that particular page, right? So we have sections of things in that page, right? So you can use the routes for that, so that different component you can attach whenever you need that component on the navigation of anything, right? When you click on submit, you need to show one page, you can show the dialog. So we can use that routing kind of things. Let's move to the next question. How many type of routes guards in Angular, and define guards as classes? So basically there are 4 different kind of guards which can be used to protect our routes. First one is can activate. Can activate routes decides if route can be activated or not. So let's go here. So if you see here, I have a can activate guard here. So which will decide which can be returned false. So here you can specify any condition here. So here in the app routes, we have can activate, can deactivate. So here we can specify our routes guard. So in the route guards, you can specify some condition which will behave whatever kind of functionality you give inside that. Whether for example, if I have one page, right, and I need to submit some answer into that, right, and I need to check whether all the questions are valid or not. So when I click on submit, I will check before navigating to another route. I need to check whether that particular data is valid or not. If that particular data is valid, I can activate that route. Otherwise, I can deactivate that route. So in these kind of condition, we can use the routing guards. Can activate child, decide if children routes of the route can be activated or not. So for example, if I have sub routes, right, so inside that sub routes also we can use the can activate child. Can deactivate decides if a route can be deactivated or not. Can load decide if a module can be loaded lazily. So how we can create a route as a class? So if you see here, I have a class can activate guard. So inside that you need to use injectable, and you need to implement can activate interface, which is can activate interface is again coming from Angular router. So in the constructor we need to provide the router, and then we need to override the function can activate, where you can specify the condition how you want to navigate to the different route. In the deactivate route also you can deactivate by returning the observable or false or delay with whatever you want in that. So this can deactivate also is a part of Angular router. So these are basically used to protect our routes. For example, if I have a authentication page, right, where we providing any credentials, and then when we click on submit and it will go to the server, and when it comes back, right, so we are navigating to another component. So before navigating to that another, we can check that value whether it's success or fail, right? So where we can activate or deactivate the another route. Let's move to HTTP in Angular 2. So HTTP is basically used to get the data from the server or from the external files. So we have HTTP client, right? So most of the front end application communicate with backend services over the HTTP protocol. In modern browser supports, we have two different APIs making HTTP requests. One is XML HTTP request interface and the fetch API. With the HTTP client in Angular Common HTTP, which provides a simplified API of HTTP functionality. To use the HTTP client, right, we need to import HTTP client module from Common HTTP. And you need to add that in the ng module. So let's discuss about how we use the get method of HTTP. So in the get, we need to pass one parameter of the file location or your URL, right, from where you are getting that data, right? So here you can see we have the API items, right? So this is API, it will go to the item and it will get that data. So here this HTTP get will return you the promise, right? So we are subscribing that, and when we get the data, we are just passing to the other component. You can check the type of the response as well. For that, you need to specify item response interface. You need to implement that interface item response, and then you will get the data in that particular format. How do we handle HTTP error and response? So HTTP also provide you the error handler. So what happens if the request fails on the server and if the poor network connection, right, which prevents it from even reaching the server, right? So when HTTP client will return you an error instead of a successful response. So if you see here in HTTP, right, when we get, it will return you the subscribe. It's what methods which return you the data and which return you the error message as well. So you can handle that inside that block. So how to get the error details? So if you see here, we have the error, we have HTTP error response. In the HTTP error response, we have the message, and whatever the message and the error object we have, we can show that on the client side. If you see here, we have error message here, which can be used for later purposes. Explain how we pass data in HTTP request. So to pass any data in HTTP, right, we need to use post method of HTTP. So in the post, you can pass the headers and the body. For example, we have the data API developer at the URL, right? You are passing the body here. So before passing the body, we need to specify the type of that content. If the type is JSON, we need to specify the JSON format. So if you see here the HTTP header as well, we are passing the header as well. So we are passing three parameters in the post method. First is the URL. The second is the body, which is the request, or you can say the payload, which we need to pass to the server. And the third one is headers. for the authorization or whatever the token you want to provide, you can pass that in the headers.